The island is 72 kilometers from the Indian mainland. It measures roughly 8 kilometers across. India has maintained sovereignty over it since 1947. India has the legal right to send a vessel there at any hour of any day. In November 2018, a 26-year-old American named John Allen Chow paddled to shore in a kayak and was killed by arrows before nightfall. His body was buried on the beach. The fishermen who had brought him to within 500 meters watched from the water and did not intervene. The Indian government chose not to send a recovery mission. The stated reason was danger to recovery personnel. The actual reason, stated plainly by multiple Indian officials, is that this island has been enforcing its own exclusion for 60,000 years, and India considers a 3 nautical mile legal exclusion zone around the entire island to be the appropriate response. 7 islands on 7 different bodies of water, each more permanently and more finally forbidden than the last. The escalation here runs along a single axis, permanence. How long has the prohibition existed, and how many forces have tried and failed to override it? By the end, you will understand why a nation of 1.4 billion people with a standing army of over 1 million soldiers has drawn a circle around a 72 square kilometer piece of forested land and decided that circle is enough. The civilization inside that forest has been enforcing its own law since before Egypt had a pharaoh, before Mesopotamia had a city, before any human language had a written word. This island is the final destination. Everything before it is preparation. Ilha da Queimada Grande sits in the Atlantic Ocean, 35 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo state. Total land area, 430,000 square meters, smaller than 55 city blocks. The Brazilian Navy has maintained a permanent civilian landing ban since 1985. The ban exists because people were landing there and dying, and the bodies were difficult to retrieve. The island holds between 2,000 and 4,000 golden lancehead vipers. The species is Bothrops insularis. It exists nowhere else on Earth. Their venom is 5 times more hemotoxic than their closest mainland relative, meaning it begins dissolving tissue before the nervous system fully registers the bite. A healthy adult struck without immediate antivenom access dies within 2 to 4 hours. The lancehead evolved this particular potency because its prey consists of migratory birds that briefly land on the island during seasonal crossings. A snake that cannot immobilize a bird before it flies clear does not reproduce. The island selected for the most lethal variant available, over thousands of generations, without interruption. The last human inhabitant was a lighthouse keeper. The Brazilian Lighthouse Authority records note that the keeper and members of his family were found dead near the building, the circumstances consistent with multiple snake strikes on the same night. The lighthouse has been automated since their deaths. No on-site visits are required to maintain it. No roads, no dock, no cleared trail, no maintenance personnel. Scientists from Butantan Institute in São Paulo receive a special Navy dispensation to land for brief supervised periods. They arrive in full bite-proof gear, with antivenom quantities sufficient for multiple simultaneous strikes. A researcher moving alone is not permitted at any point during the visit. Imagine standing at the tree line where the undergrowth begins. The grass is dense enough that you cannot see the ground at your feet. Both sides of the path move. The Navy did not post guards at Ilha da Queimada Grande. It did not need to. No one enforces the prohibition. The island does that itself. If that island has already changed how you think about the word forbidden, subscribe. Each island on this list is more permanently, and more finally, off-limits than the one before it. Off the northwest coast of Scotland, 2 kilometers from the nearest inhabited shore, sits a 196-hectare island called Gruinard. In 1942, the British War Department chose it for a test. The test involved detonating a bomb packed with Bacillus anthracis spores over a pen of live sheep, anthrax. The sheep died within days. The British military photographed the results, confirmed that aerial delivery of weaponized anthrax was viable, and cordoned the island. What happened next is the part that stays with you. The cordon held for 46 years. No guards were posted. No fence was built. Signs on the shoreline read, "Danger, prohibited landing." The anthrax required no maintenance and no guard rotation. Bacillus anthracis spores survive in soil for over a century, without any host, any moisture, or any particular temperature. They simply wait. Picture yourself on the Scottish mainland in 1960, standing on a coastal road and looking across 2 kilometers of grey water at Gruinard. The signs are visible from that distance. The island looks like any other small Scottish island, heather on the hillsides, a narrow beach at low tide. Nothing moves on it. Nothing has moved on it for 18 years, except whatever the wind is moving. You cannot approach it. You do not know, standing there, whether you will ever be allowed to. In 1986, a group calling itself Dark Harvest left a bag of Gruinard soil on the steps of the Defense Research Facility at Porton Down. Laboratory tests found detectable anthrax in the sample. The British government declined to publicly confirm whether the contamination was authentic. Within 2 years, it had begun a decontamination program. 400 tons of formaldehyde solution diluted in seawater, pumped into the topsoil. The surface was burned. In 1990, a government scientist ate grass clippings from the island on camera to demonstrate it was clean. The island was formally declassified that same year. Researchers at the University of Edinburgh have observed, with some consistency, that the decontamination reached the surface soil with reasonable thoroughness. Below 1 meter, the ground was tested less comprehensively. The island is now technically accessible. No ferry runs there. No services exist. The sign is gone. What persists in the deeper layers is a question no official body has fully answered. No one enforces the prohibition. The island does that itself. 300 meters of lagoon water separate Poveglia Island from the southern edge of Venice. The crossing by boat takes roughly 4 minutes. The Italian government has officially restricted public access since 1968. That restriction has held through 6 decades and 1 failed real estate sale. During the Black Death outbreak of 1348, Venice began using Poveglia as a plague management site. The sick were transported there to be isolated from the city. When they died, they were burned and buried in mass graves. The process repeated through successive outbreaks, 1630, 1743, several others across the intervening centuries. Total burial estimates from University of Padua researchers range between 100,000 and 160,000 individuals. The upper soil layers across much of Poveglia are composed substantially of compressed human ash and bone fragment. Excavating even a small area turns up human remains within centimeters of the surface. The ground is made, in part, of people. In 1922, the island was converted to a mental asylum. It operated until 1968 and was closed following reports of patient mistreatment that were never formally investigated. The records of those 46 years were sealed. The building still stands on the island's interior. In 2014, the Italian government auctioned a 99-year development lease on Poveglia for €513,000. A local businessman won the bid. Within 2 years, he had ceased payments, walked away from the island, and offered no public explanation. The Italian government revoked the lease. Poveglia reverted to state control. Illegal visits happen regularly. Night crossings by private boat are not uncommon. Some visitors report nothing unusual. A smaller number do not return to report. The explanation in most such cases is mundane. Most is doing considerable work in that sentence. 700 years of continuous use as a site where people were sent to disappear has given Poveglia a quality that is difficult to describe precisely and unnecessary to embellish. What is accurate to say is that everyone who has tried to do something permanent with this island, from real estate development to documentary filming, has eventually stopped and left without completing the project. No one enforces the prohibition. The island does that itself. Bikini Atoll is a ring of 23 coral islands in the Central Pacific Ocean, 3,800 kilometers southwest of Hawaii. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 23 nuclear devices there. The most powerful was Castle Bravo, fired on March 1, 1954. Yield, 15 megatons. That is 1,000 times the explosive force of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The fireball expanded to a diameter of 7 kilometers before the shockwave began traveling outward at over 1,500 kilometers per hour. The 167 Bikinian residents had been removed before the first test in 1946. A U.S. Navy Commodore told the island's leader, King Judah, that the relocation was for the good of mankind. King Judah, according to accounts from American naval personnel, responded that they would go, believing everything was in the hands of God. They left. The Commodore flew home. The tests proceeded for 12 years. The first group of Bikinians returned to the atoll in 1968. U.S. officials had declared it safe for resettlement. By 1978, routine medical monitoring found that cesium-137 levels in residents' bodies had elevated measurably from eating locally grown food. They were evacuated a second time. The atoll was declared uninhabitable again. It has not been permanently resettled since. Coconut crabs throughout the atoll still carry strontium-90 and cesium-137 in their bodies. Under U.S. Environmental Protection Agency residential contamination standards, the topsoil on the main Bikini Island would still require active remediation. Bikini Atoll was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2010. The citation describes it as a place that embodies the dawn of the nuclear age. Recreational divers visit the warships sunk during the 1946 test fleet. They are advised not to eat fish from the lagoon, not to touch sediment, not to disturb the coral. They go anyway. The Bikinians live on Edged Island, 800 kilometers from the atoll. Compensation negotiations with the United States government have continued under multiple administrations since the 1950s. Nothing has resolved. Every official who ordered the tests died at home of natural causes. That is the distinction that separates Bikini from every island you have heard about so far. The first three became forbidden through nature, history, or accident. Bikini was made forbidden by a deliberate decision made in offices far from the water, by people who never returned to see what they had done. No one enforces the prohibition. The island does that itself. The Farallon Islands sit 43 kilometers west of San Francisco. On a clear day, you can see their silhouette from the Golden Gate Bridge. They are a federally designated national wildlife refuge. The surrounding waters hold one of the highest concentrations of great white sharks in the Pacific Ocean. Unauthorized landing is a federal offense. Between 1946 and 1970, the United States military dumped approximately 47,500 barrels of low-level radioactive waste into the surrounding waters. The barrels contained contaminated laboratory equipment, medical materials, and nuclear reactor components from military research facilities. They were loaded onto barges at the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard in San Francisco Bay, transported to the site, and pushed off the stern. Some barrels were shot with rifles beforehand to accelerate sinking. The barrels were not built for deep water pressure. A U.S. geological survey conducted in the 1990s found them on the ocean floor in various states of disintegration, some embedded in sediment, some open and empty, some displaced from their original positions by submarine landslides. Radiation levels in the water column, directly above the primary dump zones, are elevated above regional background measurements. A proposal to excavate and remove the barrels was formally evaluated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the 1990s. The conclusion: disturbing the site would cause greater dispersal of contaminated material than leaving it undisturbed. The barrels remain. The great white sharks patrol the water directly above them. The wildlife refuge sits on the surface. One group of researchers holds that the contamination represents a contained legacy risk, manageable by monitoring and best left alone. Another camp holds that leaving 47,500 degrading radioactive containers 43 kilometers from a city of 900,000 people in one of the most seismically active regions in North America is an unresolved question, not a settled one. Write in the comments which position you find more defensible. No one enforces the prohibition. The island does that itself. Diego Garcia is a coral atoll in the Indian Ocean, 1,800 kilometers south of the Indian coast. It is 27 kilometers long and no more than 3 kilometers wide at any point. It holds a U.S. naval base and a UK air base operating under a 1966 agreement. At any given time, it houses approximately 3,000 U.S. military personnel and 1,000 UK personnel. No one else. There is no civilian airport, no scheduled ferry service, and no visa category under which a private individual can legally enter. Vessels approaching the territorial limit without authorization are contacted by radio and instructed to divert. A vessel that does not divert is boarded by armed personnel. The base does not receive visitors. The people who are originally from Diego Garcia are the Chagossians. There were approximately 2,000 of them when Britain agreed to transfer the territory to American use in 1966. Between 1968 and 1973, the Chagossians were systematically relocated to Mauritius and the Seychelles, island chains roughly 2,000 kilometers from their home. British government records confirm that the process was preceded by the gassing of the island's entire dog population by British authorities. conducted to reduce disruption to the evacuation timeline. No advance notice of permanent removal was given. The Chagossians were told the departure was temporary. Legal proceedings by the Chagossians to return began in the 1970s. A British High Court ruled in their favor in 2000. The British government overturned that ruling by executive order in 2004, bypassing Parliament. The International Court of Justice issued a non-binding advisory opinion in 2019, stating that the UK's continued administration of the Chagos Islands was unlawful under international law. The UK did not act on it. The base continues to operate. The Chagossians remain in Mauritius. This is the only island on this list where the prohibition is not about what the island will do to you. It is about what governments decided to do with it, and who is allowed to decide. No one enforces the prohibition. The island does that itself. We return now to the island where we began. North Sentinel Island sits in the Bay of Bengal, in the Andaman and Nicobar chain extending south from the Indian coast. It measures 72 square kilometers. Satellite imagery shows it almost entirely forested, ringed by a coral reef and a narrow beach. India has maintained sovereignty over it since 1947. Indian law, codified in its current form in 2018, makes it a criminal offense to approach within 3 nautical miles of the island's coastline without specific authorization from the Andaman and Nicobar Island administration. The Sentinelese people living inside that forest are the reason for the law. Population estimates range between 50 and 500. No census has ever been completed. Genetic analysis of related Andaman Island populations suggests the Sentinelese share ancestry with groups who reached the Andaman Islands approximately 60,000 years ago. That number is not approximate. 60,000 years of continuous habitation on a single island, before the agricultural revolution, before the Bronze Age, before any writing system developed in any civilization anywhere on Earth. The Sentinelese have been living on that island since before modern humans spread out of Africa in significant numbers. Every documented contact attempt has ended the same way. In 1974, a National Geographic film crew approached on a boat. They were met with a volley of arrows. The documentary's director was struck in the thigh. In 1981, the cargo vessel Primrose ran aground on the reef. The crew sheltered on the upper decks for 5 days while Sentinelese men moved on the beach below, carrying weapons and watching the hull. A helicopter evacuation eventually reached them. The Primrose is still visible in satellite images, rusting on the reef. In 2006, 2 fishermen who had illegally anchored close to the island overnight were killed. Indian Coast Guard helicopters attempted a body recovery. They were driven off by arrow fire. The bodies remained on the island. John Allen Chow was 26 years old and had prepared extensively. He had made previous approaches that had been turned back. He had studied linguistics and survival. He had written notes he intended to share. The fishermen who brought him to within 500 meters watched from their boat as he paddled toward the beach in his kayak. They watched him reach the shore. They watched him killed by arrows. They watched the body dragged across the sand and buried. The Indian government sent no recovery mission. The official statement noted that the laws protecting the Sentinelese and excluding outsiders were in place precisely to prevent this outcome, and that those laws had been violated. India, a nuclear-capable nation with a standing army of over 1 million soldiers, a functioning court system, and full legal authority over the island, has decided that the correct policy for North Sentinel Island is a 3 nautical mile legal circle and a law against crossing it. The Sentinelese have not asked for that protection. They have not requested contact, medicine, trade, or peace negotiations. They have not sent representatives to any government or international body. Their prohibition predates the concept of a government by roughly 59,950 years. You cannot stand on North Sentinel Island. You cannot speak to anyone who returned from it alive. You cannot map it at ground level. What you can do is look at the satellite image of a forested ring in the Bay of Bengal and understand that somewhere inside that forest is a civilization that survived ice ages and rising seas, 60,000 years of everything the planet attempted, without any institution you belong to, without any technology you use, and without any interest in contact with the world beyond the reef. No one enforces the prohibition. The island does that itself. It always has. 7 islands. A beach where golden lancehead vipers move through grass dense enough to hide the ground entirely. Anthrax buried in Scottish soil below the depth where the decontamination crew stopped, waiting without urgency. A Venetian island built from 160,000 layers of ash and bone, government banned since a businessman walked away from it without explanation. An atoll that absorbed 23 nuclear detonations, expelled its own people twice, and sits in the sun with no permanent residents. A wildlife refuge built over 47,500 barrels of radioactive waste, resting on the ocean floor, 43 kilometers from a city of nearly 1 million people. A military atoll, where 2,000 people used to live, until a government decided they were in the way. And a forested island where a civilization has enforced its own boundary for 60,000 years using arrows, silence, and nothing else. The word forbidden gets applied freely to things that are merely inconvenient. These 7 islands are what the word was built to describe. Places that have arrived at a different conclusion about your presence. Places that are not waiting for you to change their minds. They are not waiting for anything at all. If you share this with someone, share it with someone who still believes every door eventually opens if you knock long enough.